Okay, today we're going to look at the macromolecules we discussed earlier and explain the basic structures and functions of lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. We already went through carbohydrates, which is the other class of macromolecules. Okay, let's start with lipids, which includes fats and steroids. Lipids are a group of macromolecules, so large molecules, that are hydrophobic, so they're sort of special in the ones that we're going to look at, in that they fear water. They don't mix with water. We know this that if you mix oil and water, for example, in salad dressing, think about Italian salad dressing, they don't mix very well. Here's an example of a fat, and I want to just point out a couple things. The atoms that you see present are carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. The monomers for fats, so the repeating unit, there's two. Glycerol, which I'm going to circle right now in the fat, and then fatty acids is the other one. So this one has these long chains of carbon, hydrogen, carbon, hydrogen. This one's kind of bent, and those are the fatty acid chains. Fats can be solids at room temp, so think lard, butter, wax. Those are all fats, and at room temperature they exist in the solid state, or they can be liquids, so think of oils that are liquids at room temp. You probably have some in your kitchen, like olive oil, corn oil, peanut oil. And it actually depends if a fat contains a double bond between the carbons, is more likely to be a liquid at room temperature. Fats are important for long-term energy storage, so we use them to store energy in the long run. They're necessary for absorption of certain vitamins like A, D, E, and K. These are called fat-soluble vitamins, so they require fat to be dissolved. They form the membranes that surround cells, and then also they provide a cushion for organs in our body, so they have a lot of important functions. Okay, let's break down the types of fats. We have saturated fats and unsaturated fats. Saturated fats are fatty acid chains that are held together by single bonds between the carbon. They tend to be solids at room temperature. So again, lard, butter, things that you can imagine that you have in your kitchen that we would classify as fats, and if you have it on your countertop, it's in a solid state. Let's take a look at the chain and how it looks. All of the fatty acid components of the chain have single bonds between the carbon. That's indicated just by this one dashed line. That allows the fats to pack pretty closely, and so they tend to be a solid at room temperature, very dense. Unsaturated fats, on the other hand, have at least one double bond between the carbon atoms in at least one of the chains, so I'm going to circle that for you right here. And again, that introduces some space between the fatty acid chains. It doesn't allow the fats to be quite as dense, and at room temperature, they are liquids. So think, again, olive oil, corn oil, things that you would classify as fat, but at room temp exists in a liquid state. Okay, another type of lipid is called a steroid, and these are also classified as lipids because they're hydrophobic. Remember, hydrophobic means they do not mix with water. Water is polar, and these molecules are not polar. Steroids have a lot of function in the body. They exist as chemical messengers, and so they travel in the bloodstream, and they influence growth, sexual development, and other chemical properties that involve communication between cells and organ systems. Some examples are hormones like testosterone and estrogen, but also cholesterol, which is an integral part of the cell membrane, and we'll talk a lot about cells later, but it's an integral part of the membrane, or the outermost boundary of a cell in your body. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about proteins. So proteins are another type of organic macromolecule, so we're talking about big molecules, and they're made up of amino acid monomers. So again, that's the repeating unit. There's 20 amino acids that exist in nature, and I have a schematic of an amino acid right here. Let's take a close look at it. So there's a central carbon atom, so I'm going to mark that on the list there, and it's attached to 3 groups. So this is one group. This is called the carboxyl group, and again I'll kind of trace it. This is my carboxyl group, that whole thing, COOH. And it's also attached to an amino group. This is the NH2 group. And then this is what makes it unique. So there's 20 different types of amino acids, and there are 20 different what we call side chains or R groups that make them unique. Hydrogen is sort of not counted as a group because it's a small atom that's attached to it. So those are those three groups. Again, we got the carboxyl group, the amino group, and then the central carbon. This is bridging that, and attached to the central carbon again is the R group. That's what makes it unique. The atoms that come together to build up a protein, we said CH and O for lipids, and add one more for proteins, nitrogen. So nitrogen is an important component in amino acids. Amino acids join by dehydration reactions. So we've already talked about that when we talked about carbohydrates. Same idea. Dehydration reaction involves the elimination of water. So when amino acids come together, they form what's called a polypeptide, chains of amino acids. The finished protein, so this is a finished protein over here, a complete protein. I know it looks quite complex, but it's showing all these ways that the protein folds in on itself. But the finished protein is made of one or more. Here in the drawing, each color represents a different polypeptide, so this would have 3 polypeptides together. And this is one or more polypeptides twisted and folded into a specific shape. For proteins, the shape determines the function, so that folding process is really important. We talked about how shape and function are hand in hand with proteins. What is the function of proteins? Well, there are structural functions of proteins. For example, your nails, your hair, fur, feathers, skin, muscles, and pigments in your cells that make up the color of hair and skin are proteins. They're also used to speed up chemical reactions, in which case we call them catalysts, or more specifically in biology, enzymes. And they also exist to transport substances into and out of cells. Those are called transport proteins, and that allows only certain things in and out of the cell. It acts like a doorway of sorts, or a gate. Okay, our last category of macromolecules are nucleic acids, or these are organic macromolecules made up of nucleotide monomers. So the repeating unit is called a nucleotide. We're adding one more atom here, so we have carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and P is for phosphorus. So these are the atoms that make up nucleic acids, or DNA. The function of DNA is to store and transmit genetic information. And we're going to spend a lot of time talking about DNA in the future. Right now, we'll just talk about the examples. Nucleic acid number 1 that we'll talk about is deoxyribonucleic acid, and we call that DNA. And then ribonucleic acid, which we call RNA. Both are examples of nucleic acids, but they are different and they have different functions in the cell that we'll go into. Right now, let's just put nucleic acids in the category of the storage and transmission of genetic information and leave it at that, and then we're going to go into that in much more detail.